How many authors do you know whose books have sold over 200 million copies? Do you think she could teach you and me a bit about the craft of writing novels? I think you're right, and I think you'll enjoy my visit with our guest on this edition of The Inside Story.
Welcome to another episode of The Inside Story, exclusively on Liftable.tv. They say everyone has a book in them, but turning that desire into a compelling story can seem overwhelming. That's where The Inside Story comes in. Your host, Walt Larimore, is himself an author of over 40 books. Walt's goal in every episode is to inspire and entertain you by spending quality time with best-selling authors and having conversations about the art and the heart of writing. In this episode, you'll be encouraged and equipped to lean into your own writing dream and pick up some insider tips and tricks of the trade. Grab a cup of coffee and get ready for The Inside Story on Liftable.tv.
Hi everyone, I'm Walt Larimore, and I'm so glad you're joining me in my home library for The Inside Story. Today we're being visited again by a guest who writes romance novels and contemporary women's fiction. She was the inaugural winner of the fan-voted Quill Award for Romance in 2005 and has been awarded both an RITA Award and a Lifetime Achievement Award by the Romance Writers of America. She's a multiple #1 New York Times bestselling author. In fact, her novels have spent over 1,000 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. She's one of today's most popular writers, with more than 200 million copies of her books in print. The Inside Story is pleased to welcome back Debbie Macomber. Debbie, welcome back.
Oh, thanks, Walt. Glad to be back.
A lot of our viewers want to know of authors. Do you read? What do you like to read? What have you read in the last year or two?
Oh my goodness, I read all the time, every single night. When I was 4 or 5 years old, my mother took me to the library for the first time, and the librarian who handed me my first book, my mom said I put it right next to my heart. And from that moment forward, I have read every single night of my life. Now, this is a great story, but the librarian was Beverly Cleary.
You know, I don't think I've talked with an author, a published author, who doesn't read. I think it's almost required to be part of the craft, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. We have to read. And I listen to a lot of books too. I'm a much slower reader because I'm dyslexic. So listening to audiobooks really helps me. And because I know so much about the craft of writing, if there's something wrong, I'm so critical when I read. I mean, I just find myself, that's one of the detriments of being an author. You know, it's like being a chef or somebody that will taste something and know it isn't quite right. And that's the way that my ear for a book, it listens to it a lot easier than it reads it.
I was going to ask you about that because how do you turn off the editor, the self-editor, the critic, and just read? Or do you not? It just comes with part and parcel of who you are.
You don't ever really turn off that self-editor. You know, it's just there.
You know, I think being a good writer, you have to be a great, maybe a ferocious self-editor, don't you?
Yeah. Yes, definitely. Definitely.
And how'd you learn to write? You were at home, you told us last time. You went to a conference, so we know at least one, but how'd you learn your craft?
This is interesting because I'd always had the stories going through my head. And I thought the minute I sat down to write my first book, that it would just flow out of me. And I was paralyzed. So I did something that's actually pretty smart. I took 3 of the books that I loved so much that I could read them again and again and again. And I dissected them. I went through them, and just like you do in a biology class, and I took them apart scene by scene, chapter by chapter. And in the process, I learned about the structure of a novel. I learned about backstory and how to start a chapter, end a chapter, point of view, all the different things. Because whatever was in those books that I loved so much, I wanted in my own writing. And that was the only way I could think to learn to do it.
What a great suggestion. Do you continue to study writing, polish your craft?
Every day. Talent is not static. You have to learn, you have to grow. And I'm always open to that. I mean, I've never had a problem with editors editing my books. because our goal is to work together to create the best product. And if she has some suggestions, I listen. If I agree, I change. If I don't agree, we talk it out.
Yeah, I've come to learn that the editors aren't there. They're not my enemy. They want to pull out what I've done, and they're our friends. Although sometimes, in my case, they use a lot of red ink. Debbie, last time we ended with you having your very first manuscript accepted. What happened after that? How did you get from that to 200 million books?
Well, remember, I'm the storyteller, and I had written 4 books all the way through that got rejected so fast. The rejections hit me in the back of the head on the way home from the post office. I mean, that was just, now sometimes people wait a year to get rejected like that. Not me. I got rejected right away. Anyway, all 4 of those stories sold. I had to rewrite them because, remember, I had to learn to be the writer. But the gift God gave me is that of being a storyteller. So the stories were always good. And I have a lot of stories. Now, because I have a lot of stories to tell, I had to come up with a way to decide which premise to develop, because ideas pop up everywhere. And I can't write them all. So I came up with words, Walt, and 5 words that define a story for me. The first word, it has to be provocative. I want my readers to think. I want to put them in a situation where they can imagine themselves, which means the story has to be relevant. It has to be told in the most creative way I can think to tell it. It has to be creative. It's starting the book sometimes is the most creative part. And then it has to be believable. People have to believe that this could happen, and it has to be entertaining. I'm not there to teach anybody anything. I'm not, I barely made it out of high school. So provocative, relevant, creative, entertaining, realistic.
So you've got the stories. They're really bubbling up in your heart, bubbling over. They're like
That's
myriad
right.
stories. Do you research your books, and if so, how?
Well, a lot of the situations that I have don't require a lot of research. And now with the internet, it's just very easy to go on, log on, and find what you need to find. Like I said, I just take what I need and use that. And, I don't want to overwhelm people with how smart I am, because I'm not.
I resemble that remark. Debbie, some writers are, I like to call them outliners. Others are pantsers. In other words, some people outline the whole book, every chapter, every scene. They've got it all outlined. Others kind of have a general idea where they're going and just by the seat of their pants, just write. Which are you?
I started out as a pantser. I mean, I wrote by the seat of my pants. But these days, I plot. And I plot every single scene of the book. And because when I do that, it just makes the writing so much easier. And it's what I sell with, and it's what I work with. So it's my selling tool and my working tool. So like when I sit down to write, there's a paragraph there from the synopsis that'll be a chapter. And that chapter, that's the skeleton. I add the bones, the tissue, the blood vessels, everything else that makes it a body.
Now, you've got it outlined, you've got it plotted. Do your characters still surprise you? Do they come up with things you didn't expect or foresee?
Yeah, absolutely. That's happened several times. Things
Must be
that
fun to kind of see them grow as you write, huh?
it changes as I go. An idea will come to me that'll change things, and I go with it, especially if it's good.
And what's your writing schedule? And do you stick to it?
Well, because I'm in my 70s now and thinking about retirement, I'm working only half days. But I can tell you that the time that I work is the time that I work. I mean, I don't waste it. I sit down at the computer and I write and then I have the afternoons free. And that's great because I can do things that like Bible study and knit and read and spend time with my husband and our dog.
For a new writer, Debbie, is there a minimum number of hours that you recommend that they devote to writing as they're getting started?
I think that is an individual question. It will work with people that have. My friend Jane Krentz, who's another author, before she sold, she was a librarian. She would get up at 4 a.m. and write from 4 to 6 before she would get ready for work. There's just a limited time. When I first started writing, I had the family at home. The kids were young. And, I just took the time. I created that space for myself. And so it was just a few hours. And it's amazing what you can do in a few hours if you concentrate on what you have, that time you have.
Do you wrestle with procrastination at all?
Not at all. I think if I wrote when I felt like it, I'd probably be on food stamps again. It's it's a discipline, just like anything else. It's funny because when I write a book, I know there are days that the words just flow, and there are days I really struggle. But when I pick up a book, a published book, I can't tell which day was which chapter was which. It's there. Completed project.
Do you ever want to quit during a project? Because writing is hard. It's hard work. And rewriting, I find, is even harder work. Do you ever sometimes just want to run up the white flag, or do you just barrel on?
No, not at all. I love what I do, and I've never had the willingness to let go of a project. I mean, I do think that the rewriting, sometimes it takes me longer to rewrite a book than it took to write it. And that's because I want to, my editor and I are creating this to be the best possible book that can come out of me. And sometimes that just takes a lot of extra work.
I think it was Robert Louis Stevenson who said, writing is hard, but rewriting is harder, or the hardest writing is rewriting. And you would attest to that.
That's true. That's a true statement.
Debbie, it's a lonely calling, a solitary calling. Most authors find letters from readers when they come in to be exciting, to be an encouragement. What are some of the more interesting letters that you've received from readers?
Oh my goodness. I remember the first letter I ever got and how excited I was to have somebody tell me. Now I get mail every single day. And some of the things that, writers don't understand what they're saying. Like, you're my favorite writer. You put me to sleep every night.
I had a doctor that wrote me recently. He said, I recommend this last book you wrote. I recommend it to all my patients who are suffering from insomnia. Well, I hope he was kidding. What have been some of the more meaningful letters?
Oh, well, a lot of the people will write and say how their books have helped them get through really hard times. And those really touch my heart. This is the gift that God has given me. And I believe that he gave it to me for exactly that reason, to help people in times of hardship. I've discovered, Walt, that there is a real connection between the author and the reader. It's almost a spiritual connection, because I know if I laugh when I'm writing a scene, the reader will laugh. If I cry, they'll cry. If I lay my heart on the page, it will link with theirs.
Debbie, I heard that a prisoner wrote you and that was a touching letter for you.
Well, I don't know if touching is quite the right word, but it was, the men in prison are master manipulators. This is how they survived. And so when they write, they will say anything they think you want to hear. I mean, I'm telling you all that you could empty San Quentin for all the letters I've got from prisoners who said, you've turned my life around, I'm never going to commit another crime. I mean, however, this one prisoner didn't get that message, because he wrote and he said, you can be my woman. I don't even care that you're fat.
It's like, I had a little patient, 8-year-old, and she came in the office. They had a a Mickey Mouse shirt on, and I said, "Erin, I love your T-shirt." And she said, "Thank you." And I said, "Can I have it?" And she said, "No." And I said, "Why not?" And she said, "Well, you're too fat." And so her mother said, "Oh, honey, he's not that fat." So, oh my gosh, Debbie, I read somewhere that you have a list of 30 people you wanted to meet. How's that going?
Well, that was a really interesting kind of story. It was in a book I read, and the person that wrote the book, Jack Canfield, said that he had met within 2 years, he had met 80% of the people on the list. And I was so inspired by that I made my own list. And I actually met 19 of the people on that list. But I made a really, strong, powerful discovery in that the people I met, unless they were God centered, were so self absorbed, so wrapped up in themselves. I won't tell you who this is because it would disillusion you the same way it disillusioned me. I had the opportunity to meet someone on the list. And I'm telling you, I aim high. I've always aimed high. I mean, there were presidents that Billy Joel, Michael Crawford, all these different. And this person I met, I had admired their work for so much. And I wanted them to know how they had blessed me. And he stopped me. And he said, "Excuse me a minute, I need to bask." And he literally closed his eyes. And I thought he was joking. I thought, what is going on here? And then he said, "Please continue." And I just went away so disheartened that he would be so absorbed in collecting this glory and this praise. And I was just complaining to God. And right away in my spirit, God said to me, "Debbie, you wanted to meet these people. You're my daughter. I love you. But make another list of the people I want you to meet." And that has had a really profound impact on my life. Because when I meet someone, I automatically think, is this someone God wants me to meet?
Wow. Debbie, going back in our conversation, you were talking about your rejections, and especially the one at the Writers' Conference where you were cruelly reviewed. That night, the difficulty you had with the voices in your head. You just told us, remembering God saying what a precious daughter you are. But those voices that night were lies. And young writers, I think, often fall prey to the lies of the enemy of their soul. And I've sensed that the way you overcome that was reading Scripture. I mean, it was the next day when you were reading John 14:1 that God, in sort of a humorous way, encouraged you. Am I reading that right, or am I off base?
The devil is a liar, and he really tries to get us to listen to his voice. And the best way to silence that voice is to read Scripture. And I have done that every single day. And one of the things I did, we lost our youngest son in 2011. And I decided I would do a Bible for every one of my grandchildren. And so I read every single day in the Bible, and I do a Bible in a year I have that, and it's dedicated to one child. And I make notes in the margins. I share my faith with them. I share them the knowledge that I have about the Bible in the margins. And I write them a letter in the beginning of the Bible and tell them how precious they are, how God had planned their lives, and he has a plan for them. And then I share with them insights that I have in the margins of the Bible. And at the end of each book, I write a note. And that Bible then I give to them at the end of the year. And so each one of my grandchildren, and that keeps me in the Word, and it keeps me inspired. I mean, as I do that, well, I get so close to those grandchildren because every grandchild is so precious. And I pray for them every day that when I'm doing this Bible, and they are so close to my heart by the end of the year that we have this not only a physical bond, but a spiritual bond.
Debbie, I can't imagine that you've written any more important books than those.
I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right.
And I can imagine, should the Lord tarry, the generations that will be impacted. Thank you for blessing us with that. A couple of quick questions before we close. Tell our viewers about the Breakfast Club, about your Breakfast Club.
Oh, this is such a fun thing. When I first rented my office, remember, I had been a housewife and a mother. I'd not had a job outside the home. And I was having to make decisions that I felt totally unqualified to make. So I invited the most successful women in our community, the bank president, the county assessor, an attorney, and I asked them to have tea with me because I had all these business questions, and they all knew each other as acquaintances, but not as friends. And at the end of our session, they said, this was so much fun. Can we do it again? And so we decided to meet for breakfast, and they mentored me, and we met every Thursday morning at 7:30 for breakfast for 20 years. Wow. They've all retired since then. I'm the only one that's still working, but that was how my breakfast club started.
Wow, that is so neat. And tell our viewers, I think they'll be surprised to learn that you had a brief career as a Major League Baseball pitcher.
Oh, yes. I actually twice now I've been asked to throw out the opening pitch for a Mariners game. And once for the minor league in the Mariners in Tacoma. So I got demoted and then got promoted again.
Did you get the ball over the plate?
Well, let's put it like this. I did get it over the plate, but I wasn't standing at the pitcher's mound.
It's okay. That works. And lastly, what about your word of the year?
Oh, that came as a part of my breakfast club. We each decided to choose a word for the year. And I have shared that with so many people now and my readers that so many people do that. This year's word is hope. And, we were going through the pandemic and, hope.
Debbie, you've blessed so many by being here. I'm so grateful. I'm wondering if you could look at all of the aspiring writers out there, the writers that are hoping, that have that dream that you had once, that hope of being a writer. What advice would you give to each of them?
I would say that if God has given you this dream, that He will make a way where there is no way. He certainly did for me.
It's not your way, it's Yahweh, if he calls and guides.
Yes.
Debbie, thank you for blessing us. Thanks for being here. And God bless in this next year of hope.
Thank you, Walt.
Before we end today's program, if you have a comment or suggestion, maybe an author that you'd like me to interview, just email me at insidestory@liftable.tv. That's insidestory@liftable.tv. And in addition, if you'd like to subscribe to one of my blogs or my newsletter, just sign up at drwalt.com. That's drwalt.com. So until our next visit, remember the words of the psalmist who wrote, God rewrote the text of my life when I opened the book of my heart to His eyes. May His and your writing be blessed.
Thanks for watching this episode of The Inside Story, hosted by Walt Larimore. If you have comments about the show or there's an author you'd love to hear from, email Walt at insidestory@liftable.tv.